The carriage wheels strained and squeaked as they were pushed along the western road. Their travels thus far had not been pleasant, but had been smooth nonetheless. Joanna continuously peered out the carriage windows while holding or playing with young Tyler. She took the time to point out the landmarks and landscapes to him as they passed. The reach and their rotting crops to the south, and the ever-drying riverlands to the north. Lady Joanna heard Osmond, the commander of her garrison, shout commands to her guard. Not shortly after, the carriage grinded to a halt. Without fanfare, Osmond hoisted himself to the carriage, and open-handed slapped the wall of the carriage behind the driver. Without words, the four-horse lead jerked their ride along the western road. Osmond then twisted himself to face her, as he guided his sheathed blade around the mounted furniture before he took a seat.
G'day, milady. We may have a small problem,
Tell me, Lord Osmond, what is it that could make us worry? Way out here in the middle of nowhere.
Lady Joanna asked bluntly. Osmond drew a deep breath to reply, just as the carriage wheel skipped over a tree root that temporarily removed him from his seat.
One of our scouts, who rides out at a perimeter, never reported back in. Likely he fell from his horse. But our replacement scout never found the horse, or a body eye.
Lady Joanna digested this, but her concern was in the travel plans.
How does this affect our travels moving forward?
She asked impatiently, and Osmond's stiff upper lip conveyed disagreement before he ever spoke.
Yeah, nah. You're missing the point, milady. I assume we are being followed. Lannister banners are enough to discourage common thieves, but acute action suggests something more egregious. Maybe personal. Is there anyone with a personal grudge who could travel freely through the Riverlands?
Osmond asked directly, as Joanna finally realized what this could mean.
Yes, Lord Tully could have a quarrel with me.
She admitted directly, and Osmond scoffed in frustration.
The Lord of the goddamn Riverlands takes issue with you, and your dodgy father neglected to mention this to the captain of his daughter's guard. What kind of shit detail is he running?
Osmond demanded, but likely didn't expect an answer from the young lady.
Let's assume our missing rider is because we are being followed by those loyal to House Tully. How do we proceed?
Joanna asked directly, and Osmond pulled slightly on his long dark beard as he thought on his next words.
Tonight, under the cover of darkness, I will smuggle you out of the caravan, along with your bloody brother. We will camp in the lowlands on the north side of the road. Our uninvited guests will be eyeing us from the highlands to the south. Please be aware, milady, this could mean the slaughter of your father's men. But it could spare Lannister blood if you agree,
Osmond suggested. But Joanna assumed he would not take her concerns into consideration. Joanna looked over to young Tyler as he stared down at one of the many books he was constantly rereading during their travels.
What of my handmaidens?
Joanna asked, and Osmond was quick to respond.
Yeah, nah, if we mean to draw out these dickheads, better to bait the hook. Please forgive the expression. Your life may be at stake, milady.
Osmond finished, as Joanna thought deeply upon it. What would Lady Sansa do in this position? These men were pledged to House Lannister. Is it inconsiderate to expect them to fulfill their vows, even unknowingly? Joanna heard many times Lord Tyrion was forced to make decisions that were threat of life related. She never assumed she would be forced into the same decision so soon.
We will do as you suggest, Lord Osmond.
Joanna decided, as Tyler smiled. She assumed he liked the idea of sleeping under the stars, rather than inside the stuffy room for another night.
After dark, before we start a fire, cover yourself while carrying Tyler. Make no conversation with anyone. I'll lead you to safety where I can keep watch throughout the bloody night.
Osmond finished, as he slapped the bulkhead again, bringing the carriage to a halt. He exited briskly, and provided no other clarification to Lady Joanna. For the remainder of the evening, she searched through her belongings, and finally located a long black cloak at the bottom of her trunk. The carriage finally came to a halt as Osmond ordered his men to make camp for the night. The sun was setting below the horizon when Joanna explained what was happening to young Tyler. He couldn't contain his excitement at the thought of a battle happening tonight. Joanna could feel his little heart thumping away as he pressed his chest to hers. The long black cloak was spacious enough to engulf both the young Lannisters, as darkness was finally upon them. "Wolves! Wolves to the south! All men to arms!" the sentry shouted. Joanna peeked out of the window facing north. No guards remained, and this was her chance to escape unseen. Joanna folded her arms under Tyler's bottom as she ran flat-footed away from the carriage. She breathed heavily as she made her way down the embankment that supported the western road. She splashed ankle-deep in water, and she spun trying to find Osmond, but she was only surrounded by trees and brush. She was starting to panic. If the wolves were not a diversion, she was now alone, unarmed, and in the presence of a predator. fog poured from her mouth as her panicked breath attempted to keep young Tyler calm. Joanna leaned against a tree, debating her predicament, as a hand came over her mouth, shushing her as she panicked.
Pipe down, Yminga. Shut your fucking trap.
Osmond demanded, as she finally calmed herself.
There is a set of pelts for you two to cover up in and spend the night. If anything should happen to me or the rest of your father's men, follow the path here down to the stream. 2 horses are tied to a downed tree blocking the stream.
Osmond finished, though Joanna could barely make him out in the darkness. He was covered in mud and thick brush, and she could only see the whites of his eyes as he spoke. Joanna was soaked from the knees down, and she used the dry part of her long hooded cloak to dry herself as Tyler crawled under the pelts that would be their bed for the night. Joanna could barely see Osmond stand watch as he blended into the brush. They had a proper view of the caravan once they started a small fire to ready their rations. Still, with the added light, Joanna could only make out the occasional sights Osmond would show. The removal of his bow from his back and the glare of an arrowhead trained upon the camp. Here they would wait for the Tullys to make an attempt on the caravan. The cool night's breeze brushed across Joanna's face as she struggled to keep watch alongside Osmond. Tyler had long since fell asleep under the pelts with his sister. Joanna's breath continued to fog from under the warmth of the pelts. Just an hour or so from daybreak, Joanna woke to see Osmond's movements.
Stay down. Keep that bloody Tyler quiet.
Osmond whispered as Joanna slightly shifted her weight. The full moon provided just enough light for Osmond to spot his targets as the campfire near the carriage had burned low. Joanna first counted 4, then nearly a dozen men emerged. Still the Lannister guardsmen failed to raise the alarm. One after another, the Tullys slashed at the throats of the sleeping Lannister guardsmen. Any Tully who wandered off by himself was instantly met, the pointy end of Osmond's iron-borne bow. Osmond laid low, only emerging to take a shot from the brush. Every time a Tully man observed a body impaled from an arrow, he quickly met the same fate. Nearly a dozen men fell to Osmond's iron-borne bow. Joanna felt torn as her father's men were slaughtered in their sleep. She wanted to scream aloud to warn them, men whose oaths were to protect her, and she was failing in showing them the same devotion. Constantly, Osmond's arrows peppered the onslaught in complete silence. Still, Joanna was torn. A slim shadow appeared in front of the carriage, and Joanna felt her heart stop. She flipped the pelts over to find young Tyler missing from her charge. Young Tyler had woke and scurried down to the carriage, unbeknownst to the young lady charged with his protection. Joanna wanted to scream as the Tully soldier appeared on the opposite side of the carriage. He had not yet seen the blonde-haired child attempting to enter. Joanna whispered once, again louder than before, warning Osmond of the wayward youth about to meet his demise. Still no arrow flew towards Tyler's direction. Joanna left from her cove and sprinted across the road. After a few tense seconds, she scooped up young Tyler and rolled themselves underneath the carriage. She covered Tyler's mouth to ensure his silence. She controlled her breathing, attempting to stay silent, but she was aware of the noise that she had made. The bloody gurgling of soldiers slain in their sleep still ringed in her ears. The ominous sound of footsteps echoing her own approached the carriage, and she held her panicked breath. The footsteps approached and bent down to confront them. Joanna felt pride surge through her, as the thought of her own demise would be in defense of her brother. How she had hoped Lady Sansa would be prideful of her final act. An acute groan and scream occurred as a blade pierced through the chest of the Tully soldier who approached the carriage.
Oi, get to the horses. Move your damn asses.
Osmond screamed, but in a whisper. Joanna rolled again, holding Tyler's mouth so tight she worried if he could breathe. Again she splashed through the muck of the riverlands, to the stream Osmond spoke of. After a lengthy run, Joanna found the horses tied to the downed tree and set Tyler atop the shorter of the 2 horses. She took one final look over her shoulder as she mounted the horse behind young Tyler. The reins were free, and she set her horse into a fierce gallop. After a few moments of riding, she paused to check her backside. Another set of hooves closed her position. Joanna was not aware of whether they were friend or foe. She took the conservative position and continued to take flight. The hooves closed her position as Tyler was now screaming for his mother. Joanna refused to disappoint Lady Sansa. She heard steel being unsheathed as she ducked low to avoid the blade. She felt the brief kiss of the blade as a lock of blonde hair tumbled into the night. She drew a deep breath as she knew the second attempt was more likely to make its mark. The horse behind her whelped as a bold collision took the pair of steeds to the ground. Joanna galloped to a safe distance, observing Osmond take the older Tully soldier to the ground. The two traded blows of their longswords. Once locked, Osmond took the Tully to the ground, and a blood-curdling scream filled Joanna's ears as the men wrestled in the mud. Joanna drew deep breaths as the pair of men ceased all movement. Her stern stare turned to relief as Osmond righted himself and recovered his breath. Joanna cried in relief as he emerged from the pile of bodies and blood. His breath fogged around his head as he sighed.
Yeah, nah, how is the little lord?
Osmond asked in exhaustion.
He's upset, but he is fine.
Joanna explained to Osmond's relief.
Little shit almost got us both killed. He's as much trouble as his father,
Osmond laughed at his own joke as he spun his view trying to locate his horse. His own steed never righted itself as Osmond slashed a blade and put the poor animal out of its misery. The Tully steed was still capable of travel as Osmond transferred his saddlebags to the new horse.
Yeah, nah, we won't be returning to the bloody caravan. We need to move now. We're still a fortnight away from Casterly Rock,
Joanna quickly realized the second half of their travels would not be nearly as comfortable as the first half. Her father's guard were killed alongside numerous Tully soldiers. Joanna now regretted her provocation of Lord Brynden. She never assumed the slight would mean her own death. Joanna rode stone-faced as she replayed the conversation in the throne room. Lord Tyrion would be furious, and Lady Sansa would man the executioner's block herself. The Riverlands were known for their bloodshed, but Joanna was prepared to unleash her grandfather Tywin's fury upon the lands he had once decimated. Joanna thought to herself as the pair of horses hurried on a path slightly parallel to the western road.